Good morning. My name is Steve. I'm one of the ministers here, and our worship team does a great job of leading us. Yeah, don't they? I love the bridge of that song. This morning we'll taking a step forward from our last series that we began at the start of the year, where we looked at the church as a beautiful presence. And if you weren't here, we walked verse by verse through the first 3 chapters of the book of Revelation. And for the next month or so, we're going to actually build on that and try to ask ourselves, as we attempt to be a beautiful presence in the world, what does this mean for us individually? How do we do this? And I want to start this morning by just asking you this question. Can you think of one person who has made a difference in your life? Just bring their name to mind, if you would. I think all of us, every person here this morning, each person watching online, we all want to make a difference in the world. There's something inside of us that longs to make an impact. Like nobody dreams of waking up and going to work and coming home, watching Netflix, scrolling through social media, and then doing it all again the next day and the next day and the next day until your last breath. That's nobody's mission in life that I know of. We all want to make a difference. We want to be part of something that will impact the world, that will change the world. We want to be the kind of people who have made an influence while we are here on earth. We want to be something bigger, part of something bigger than just our own little selves. But something happens, and it doesn't take very long until you realize that life just kind of seems to go by. And every once in a while, you kind of have to stop and say, am I making a difference in this world? Like it seems like the days are long, but the years are fast, and the years go by, and you just ask yourself, is the world any different because I've been here? Everybody wants to know whether they can make a difference in this world. Now, some of you, even as I bring this kind of topic up, you're already thinking to yourself, well, that's not me. I have a small life. Or you think to yourself, yeah, Steve, but I'm too young. I hope I make a difference someday when I'm older. But I'm like 12 years old. I'm like 15 years old. What kind of difference can I make? And then there's some others of us who are a lot older, and maybe you're in your 70s or 80s or 90s, and you're thinking to yourself, those days are gone. Like, I'm just trying to get through this day and get to my appointments. That's the difference I want to make. Like, I want to feel better tomorrow than I do today. I'm too old for that. There's others of us that feel like we don't have a sphere of influence. I know there's a lot of us here that are from different parts of the world, and you just don't know a lot of people here. How would you make a difference? What do you have to do? There's a bunch of us here that when we think about making a difference, we think, well, maybe when I get some things sorted out in my own life, then I'll think about making a difference in other people's lives. And there's probably some people here that are kind of like Aaron in the Bible. You're like, how could I make a difference? I can't even have a conversation with people. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too tired. I'm too broken. I'm too incapable. And part of that is because most people, I would think in our world, think that making a difference in the world is measured by how many and how much. Like how many friends, how many followers, how many likes on social media, how many comments. And there's even a phrase in our world that is given to people who are good at that kind of thing, and we call them an influencer, right? An influencer. And basically it has to do with how many people you're able to impact. How many thousands of people on social media can you impact? A lot of people think that it takes money, or it takes power, or charisma, or giftedness to make a difference. And we live in a time in history, there's never been more access to information, inspiring and helpful content to help us become a people of influence. And yet it seems that a lot of people don't think that that's happening in their lives. They're not making a big difference. And that maybe if they just did the right thing. Someone came to me 2 or 3 years ago and said, Steve, we got to work on your brand. I said, what are you talking about? Like, I grew up on a farm. Branding means something different to me than what you're talking about. I said, no, they said, we got to work on your image, like how you present yourself to the world. I'm like, what do you mean? Like a pastor who wears plaid and cheers for the Saskatchewan Roughriders? What are you talking? If you want to make a difference, you need to do this. And I just couldn't understand what he was trying to describe to me. What he was trying to do was to say, here's how you can make a bigger difference. Well, Jesus is pretty much, there's not much argument to say against this, that Jesus is the greatest influence in human history. He's had the greatest influence on history. And yet his impact on history is surprising because he doesn't have a very good brand. It's surprising because he doesn't use the formula that society gives us to make a difference in the world. He grew up in a poor family. He was a carpenter for most of his life. He never traveled very far from his hometown. He never went to college. He was never voted into office. He never really had a title or position that, his resume would not look that great. He didn't have thousands of Facebook friends. He didn't have a lot of Instagram followers. He wasn't TikTok famous. He had no YouTube channel that I know of. So how did he make a difference in the world? There's one phrase that I think captures this, and it's just a reminder that I think we need maybe as we think about being a beautiful presence in this world. That this is the way that Jesus made a difference. And that difference has continued even to this morning. And it's just this simple phrase. He did it one at a time. One at a time. Sometimes maybe we make making a difference a little more complicated than it is. That you have to have a viral post or your name on a building or something. But it's actually not dependent on your contacts or your bank account. If you want to make a difference, the Jesus way is to focus on one. That's our big number one. That's how he made a difference. The secret of the way of Jesus is this idea of beautiful one at a time. One person at a time. You can almost think of this like when Jesus walked on earth, he had a zoom lens. When someone stood in front of him, time stopped. Everything else in his life, his concerns, his agenda, his plans, his goals, it seemed to blur or disappear. Like interruption, he just basically went from interruption to interruption. The thing that really mattered to him was the person that was right in front of him. We'll look at one story, although we could look at several. This story comes from Luke chapter 8. You can also find it in Mark chapter 5. The story goes like this. Jesus has just been to one side of the Sea of Galilee, where he has healed a demoniac, and then he comes over to the other side, and the crowds are there. He returns, and a crowd has welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. So I don't know if you've ever felt this, but there was a crowd of people that had expectations for him. You ever feel like you have a lot of people in your life that expect a lot of things from you? Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, a leader of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. Can you see it? And as Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. So Jairus steps in front of Jesus, and for that moment, he becomes the sole focus of the story. Jesus' zoom lens is in on him. And he agrees to go with Jairus, but then something happens. There's a woman in the crowd who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. So the crowd is all around him. This woman has got constant bleeding. She sneaks up. We know that she sneaks up because she would have been unclean in that culture, so she would have to come quietly, probably covering herself. She sneaks up and she finds Jesus, comes up behind him. She touches the fringe of his robe, and immediately the bleeding stops. And Jesus says this. Jesus says, "Who touched me?" Everybody says, come on, man. Like everybody's touching you. Peter's like, dude, this whole crowd is pressing up against you. They're crushing you. They're crushing you. What do you mean, who touched me? And Jesus says, no. Someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out of me. So this big crowd is all around Jesus, but that's not what he's focused on. The number that mattered to Jesus was one. It's like taking a picture on your phone. Like say you turn your phone sideways and you take a picture of a crowd. And someone is standing in the crowd, and you take your fingers and you zoom in on one person in the crowd. You zoom in until you see their face, and then your camera sort of adjusts, and that face comes into focus. And in that moment, everything else kind of just begins to blur. All the crowd just kind of becomes background, and there's Jesus zooming in on the one. And what happens next, I think, is a pretty cool statement, a pretty neat verse. It says this, Jesus says, someone touched me, and then the woman realized this. She could not stay unnoticed. Isn't that a great line? She knew that Jesus, the eyes of Jesus, would not let her go unseen. Something that I read that this week, and I thought, wow, like maybe that's one of our calling as a church, just to make sure that nobody goes unnoticed. Wouldn't that be a great mission for us? Nobody goes unnoticed. So in the crowd, nobody can go, this woman cannot go unnoticed. Jesus loves everybody in the crowd, but he loves them one at a time. And so he's constantly zooming in on one person. In fact, you could say this is actually the way that Jesus, it's his method of operation in the Gospels. As I read through the Gospels, this kind of just popped out at me over and over again, that one after another, Jesus goes from one person into another person. And he dials in on them. So whether it's Zacchaeus, Jesus comes down to Zacchaeus, there's all these crowds, and Jesus chooses to talk to Zacchaeus. Another time, there's all these crowds, but there's a leper who shows up, and Jesus zooms in and focuses on the leper and sort of crops everybody else out of the picture for a second. Jesus goes to another place where a bunch of people are there. There's a lot of sick people, but somehow we read of the one who was there that Jesus reached down and healed. So over and over again, the way that Jesus makes a difference is one at a time. One at a time. That's how he changes the world, one at a time. Like, what if we could have eyes to see like Jesus, to see people like Jesus? 40 times in the gospel, we read this phrase that Jesus saw. In fact, Jesus saw is actually, I think, is kind of like the precursor to the most transforming things that he does. So if you want to have the results that Jesus had, have these amazing stories and do what Jesus did, you have to see people like Jesus saw people, which is a very fascinating thing. It happens one at a time. Now, usually when I see people, I'm not zooming in on them and thinking about how that I can have a transforming experience with them. I'm thinking, what do they want from me, and what can I get from them, right? But Jesus sees people differently. Sometimes, occasionally, someone will say to me, Steve, why in all of your talks are you always asking us, do you see? Like, it's kind of annoying, man. You're always asked, that's your brand. Do you see? Do you see? Do you see? Do you see? And I do. It's not an accident. I do it on purpose because it actually begins with vision. Jesus' vision was so profound. He saw people like nobody else saw people. And here's how he saw people. Notice what he does with this woman. Someone touched me. She could not stay unnoticed. She began to tremble on her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. And then he says this to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Now, we might not catch this, but this was just that word, daughter. So imagine this, a society where men don't talk to women they don't know, where husbands don't talk to their wives in public. And Jesus speaks this word in front of everybody, this word of affection. And the way that he refers to her reveals to us how he sees her. Daughter. The text says that she's been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had spent all of her money. In other versions of this, that she had spent all of her money on alleged cures and nothing would have helped. Historians tell us that a lot of those cures would have been very painful and embarrassing. The religious laws for this woman at that time meant that her illness made her unclean, which meant that she wasn't able to worship at the temple. So she's been ostracized by her community. People would tell her, your sickness is punishment from God for your sin. If you just had enough faith, you would be healed. If she was married and she had kids, then she was not allowed to touch her kids or her husband. She had likely been forced to leave the community and cry out unclean whenever she was around people. That's how we know she must have snuck up to touch Jesus. She would have been forced to leave her home, most likely. So for 12 years, a living nightmare, distanced from people emotionally and physically. And now, imagine this. Imagine that's your daughter suffering in that way. How must God have felt when he saw his daughter suffering like that for 12 years? Well, that's what Jesus saw. Jesus saw her as a daughter. And so, of course, he said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." Do you see? Our invitation to make a difference in the world starts with this: to see one person at a time as a child of God. Jesus says, it says that Jesus, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. How do you possibly have compassion on a crowd of people that want something from you? When you can see them one at a time, one daughter, one son at a time. Let me just push this a little bit. This, I think, is one of the most profound things that we can come to understand. And if you catch this, you'll be able to see how you can make a difference. Every person that you see, every encounter that you have, is every time that you go to the checkout counter, every time that you go through Tim Hortons drive-thru, the person that you connect with is someone that God loves so much that he sent Jesus to die for them. A child of God, made in the image of God. And if you can see them like that, then you can treat them like Jesus. Do you see? Jesus, how could he possibly say, "Father, forgive them," the people who are crucifying him? Why? How could he say that? How could he say, "Forgive them"? He could say that because he didn't see them, first of all, as people who were crucifying him. He saw them, first of all, as children of God, as ones for whom he was willing to die. If every person that you, sometimes we get this, okay, this is a bit of a rant. I might have to think this through a minute here. Listen, we add so many words on top of people. We define them, we say, "How would you like to be defined?" Or we define them by their skin color or their nationality. Listen, what if being a follower of Jesus means that when you look at somebody, the first thing that you see with your eyes is that they are a child of God. They are a son or a daughter of the Holy One. And they're worth the price of Jesus to God. Wouldn't that change it all? That person in front of you on the Deerfoot. First of all, a child of God. That person at the counter, at the checkout till, a child of God. What if you saw them like that and treated them accordingly? I'll say this. The relationship problems that you have, the people that frustrate you, the people that drive you nuts, the people that you have issues with, what if you saw them first of all as a child of God? Not first of all as that frustrating person that needs to change. Most of the time, we evaluate our connection, our vision of people based upon how valuable they are to us. But what if we evaluated people, what if we saw people based upon not how valuable they are to us or valuable they are to society? What if we based our perception of people and our interactions with people upon how valuable they are to God? Put it another way, they're not just your coworker. They're a child of God. They're not just your spouse, your child, your boss, your friend at the locker. They're a child of God. Jesus had this vision that enabled him to make a difference, but it started with how he saw people. And once you see people in a certain way, once you see them as that valuable to God, once you see them as a child of God, then you can treat them in a way that will impact their eternity. The people who have made the most difference on your spiritual journey, I guarantee, are people who saw you with the kind of love that God has for you. And that's why they acted like that. basically Jesus went around and he saw people that way, and then he just reacted like you would to someone who is that precious. And so he would heal them, or he would listen to them, or he would eat with them, or he would forgive them. Everywhere he went, he moved people. And this is what you do. If you see people one at a time as a child of God, then all you need to do to impact the world is act accordingly. And how do you act accordingly? You just help them move one step closer. One person at a time as a child of God, moving one step closer to God. That's what we're called to do. That's what we're called to be about. And so the invitation is, Jesus, help me to see like you see. Help me to see. What if we just prayed this prayer? I know there's lots of great prayers to pray, but maybe this is one of the best. And if you can see people as God sees them, then you can help them take one step at a time. This is really what Jesus did, I think. One person at a time. He moved them one click closer to the kingdom. It's not a big giving of a large amount of money. It's not a saving of a life. It's not preaching to thousands of people. It's one person at a time. The best stories of this, I think, are like Mother Teresa stories, which probably isn't, some of it's hard to relate to her, but I like the story of one time she was in Australia, and she was visiting an elderly Aboriginal man who lived in absolute squalor. In fact, she said it was one of the worst conditions she had ever seen. This is coming from a woman who served in Calcutta for all those years. And she told the man, she met with him, and she said, I'm going to go to your house, I'm going to clean your house, I'm going to wash your clothes and make your bed. He said, no way. She said, no, I am. And if you know anything about Mother Teresa, when she said she was going to do something, nothing could stand in her way. So she went to his house. She cleaned his house. She washed his dishes. And she was cleaning his house, and she noticed a lamp. And the lamp was covered in dust. And she said, don't you ever light your lamp? Like, don't you ever use it? And he said, well, no one ever comes to see me. So I have no need to light my lamp. Like, who would I light it for? She said, well, would you light it if some nuns came here and visited? And he said, of course I would. So Mother Teresa did her thing. The next day, the local nuns committed to come and visiting him every evening. And then she writes in her memoirs that 2 years later, she received a message from him, and it simply said this: tell my friend that the light she lit in my life continues to shine. Isn't that good? You say, well, I can't really relate to Mother Teresa. Well, let me give you another example. Linda Wilson was in the San Francisco newspaper a few years ago. She's a bus driver. And the reason she was in the paper, in the San Francisco Chronicle, is because she loved the people that got on the bus with her. And so the reporter kind of did this interview and spent a day with her, and she knew all the regulars, she knew all their names. She would wait at various bus stops if the right person wasn't there at the right time. He recorded that she would often get out and help an elderly woman get on the bus. Imagine a bus driver doing that if they had groceries or something like that. The bus shelters that she went past, she would notice people who were new to town, and she often invited them over to her house for a meal or something like that. And the reporter said, well, like, what's up with this? Never seen a bus driver like this. And she said, well, I start the day and I say, God, put things in front of me. Show me my life. And so if there's a senior who has a hard time getting in the coach, then I'll reach out and help her. God is showing me that. If there's someone that comes in and they can't afford the fare, well, maybe I just think today you pay what you can. And she didn't call it her job. She called it ministering. Isn't that good? When you see people a certain way, then you just do what needs to be done to move them one step closer. Well, my favorite example of this, I think I'm going to get some people to help me on the stage. And those of you who are looking down right now, don't worry, I won't pick on you. But I usually get Jim and Alan because they're kind of standard. So you guys can come and help me. I need a couple other people. I need a lady to come up and help me. Tracy, how are you feeling about it? You could do it, yeah. So let's. We need some other helpers. Any volunteers? Maybe I should start there before I calling out people. Yeah, come on up. Okay, you're the volunteer. Okay, come on up. Here, give me 5. Okay. All right. Okay, so you guys just share your name with everybody. Jim, come stand up here. Share your name so everybody can see. So we got Jim, Tracy, Grayson, and Alan. All right. So let me ask you this question: How do we make a difference in someone's life? How does someone go from where they are at to becoming a Christian or changing their life? I want to suggest to you. Actually, we need one more person up here. Oh, Grayson, maybe you could do this job. We'll start with Grayson. Andrew, where's Andrew? Andrew should come up here too. All right, Grayson will start over here. Okay? And Grayson how are we going to get Grayson to come to the Lord? How are we going to get his life to change? Okay? I mean, he already has, so he's just for illustration purposes here. Like how is he going to make it to the cross? How is he going to make it to heaven? How are we going to make a difference in his life as a church? Well, let's imagine that Grayson is a young 5-year-old. Okay? And he comes to church, and Alan is his Sunday school teacher. Okay, Alan, come over here. Yeah, you're still a long ways from Jesus, so stay over here at this point. And he comes to Jesus. Maybe Grayson's grandma brings him to church. And he comes to Sunday school, and his Sunday school teacher is awesome. Loves Jesus, loves Grayson, and is just so glad that he's here. Now, Grayson, at this point, all he knows is that church is a safe place, and church is a place where he feels loved. Okay? And grandma brought him there, and Alan helped him do that. Now, Grayson's growing up a little bit. Yeah, you can. And Grayson becomes a teenager. Now, at this point, Grayson, maybe Tracy, you're over here. Come over here. Grayson, at this point, he's a teenager, which is where he's at right now. And life gets kind of hard for him. He gets really confused. And he doesn't really, doesn't get the whole Jesus thing. Or as one teenager said to me a couple weeks ago, I just don't get it. Everyone else seems to experience God, but not me. And Grayson's confused, and he starts to make some decisions that move him that way. And stay with me. I got to keep my eye on Grayson. And but there's a person at his school who listens to him. And she had an experience when she was younger, and she wandered away from God. And all she did was listen. And all she did was be present with him. And Grayson didn't seem to want to go to church, but he knew that she was a Christian. Well, years later, Grayson has moved on, and he has a boss. And his boss is fair to him and gives him compassion when he shouldn't have to, and invests not only in the business but also in his life. And Grayson knows his boss is a Christian. His Christian and Jim says to him one day, "Hey, why don't you come to church and just give it another shot?" And Grayson remembers the Christian that he met as a teenager. He remembers what it was like when he was a kid. And he says, "All right, I'll do it." He comes to church. Come over here to church. And that day, Andrew's preaching. And Andrew speaks in such a way that Grayson gets it. And he remembers what it was like when he was a teenager. And Andrew tells him about a man named Jesus who loves him, who could save him. And Grayson at that point says, "I'm going to check this out." Now, we could go on and on with this, but let me just come back here. Listen. How did Grayson, keep going. How did Grayson get all the way from just one person to somebody who gives his life to Christ? Well, he did it one click at a time. And Alan loved him and clicked him forward, gave him a good experience of God. And so did someone at school. So did a boss. And so did a pastor. And my point is this: how do we make a difference? We do it as the body of Christ, and we do it one click at a time. One click at a time. One person loves you. One person connects with you. One person gives you hope. One person shares the gospel with you. The average stats of a person who gives their life to Jesus is that they take at least 7, it's even more than that now, times that they have to hear the message of Jesus. And so when Grayson one day arrives at the pearly gates, how did he get there? One click at a time, the body of Christ loving one person at a time. Do you see? Thanks, you guys. Sometimes you might think, well, I'm not a preacher. You might think, well, I don't have a lot of gifts. What you do have is somebody in front of you that you can move one click closer to Jesus and his kingdom. I was thinking about this week, and some sermons I do research and grammar and Greek and background and all that. This week I just used my sanctified imagination. And I started to imagine what heaven would be like. Like when heaven comes down and the earth is restored and made new and the curse is gone, what would that be like? Picture yourself arriving there. You're a new arrival. And as you get there, there's an invitation to a ballroom, to a grand ballroom, to a party. I don't know if this is true. Just walk with me for a bit. And when you arrive, you walk over to a table of incredible-looking appetizers and desserts. There's a little note there that says calorie-free. This is heaven. And you feel a little tap on your shoulder. And there's someone, and there's a young lady. And she says, I just had to come over and say thank you. And you don't know, who are you? I don't even know you. She says, well, we met once. Really? My life was a mess, she said. I was desperate. I didn't believe in God. I didn't know what else to do. So I came to Bow Valley Christian Church. And I was nervous when I walked in. And I was getting ready to turn around and walk out. But there you were walking in, and you said, come and have a seat. And you had a smile on your face. And you looked happy to see me. You sat with me through church. You invited me back. And I told you I'd think about it. I didn't come back next week. But I want you to know that my mom passed away a little after that. And I decided to go back to church. Jesus changed my life, and I just want to say thank you for seeing me. She gives you a hug. And then you spot the Slurpee machine. Of course there's a Slurpee machine in heaven. And you get the biggest cup that you can find. And you fill it because there's no brain freeze in heaven, right? And as you're doing that, a man walks up to you, and he worked with you for a couple of years. And he says, do you remember me? He says, yeah. And he says, I moved from another country. And I came to Canada, and I didn't know anyone. I could barely speak the language. And you invited me for lunch. And you told me that you thought it would be very difficult to move to this country. And you answered all of my questions, and you invited me to church. And I just want to say thank you. And you have tears in your eyes now. Nobody's supposed to cry when they drink a Slurpee. But they're happy tears. And here's the thing. I don't know what heaven's going to actually, all the details. But I imagine that keeps happening every day. Over and over every day. A classroom, a childhood classmate comes to you and says, thank you. Thank you for sitting with me at lunch. I saw that you prayed and bowed your head. You're the first Christian I'd ever met. A young man comes up to you and introduces himself. He's the young man from Guatemala that you sponsored. A person that you prayed for, but you never even saw or never even knew, comes and says, thank you for praying for me. But I didn't even know them. And then a server from the restaurant that you go to after church says, thank you. You always took time to ask about my day. You left a generous tip. I remember the time that you asked if you could pray for me. God used that moment to know that he sees me. Another woman or another person comes up to you that you've never met, and they just say, thank you. Thank you for giving your money, your ministry to the ministry of that church that you supported, changed my life. Imagine if heaven is this place where, like, one after another, people just come up to you and say, thank you for the text that you sent. Thank you for the way that you prayed for me. Thank you for the offering that you made. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for making that decision. Thank you for the hug. Thank you for the handshake. Thank you for smiling. That you impacted all these people that you never even imagined. And then, imagine one day you're eating at Heaven's Steakhouse. And you get a message. A messenger comes, and it's a messenger from God himself. And the message is, we need you at the front porch. And you walk up, and Gabriel says, have a seat. And he says, there's something that Jesus wants you to see. And then Gabriel points ahead of the porch to a road that leads off into the distance. And you recognize the road. It's the road that leads from earthly life to eternal life. And Gabriel says, watch this. You're going to love this. You can see Jesus standing on the road, not far from the front porch where you are. And it looks like Jesus is waiting for somebody, like he's anticipating someone. And as you look down, you look farther and farther into the distance, you see like the shadow of somebody coming down the road. And then Jesus starts walking towards that person that's walking this direction. And then the person starts running. And then Jesus starts running. And then the two of them get there and they embrace. And all of the angels start to celebrate. It's just one person, but like this epic party breaks out. And as the person gets closer, you recognize their face. And you can hardly believe it. Who is it? Who is it? Who is it? Give me a name. It's a person that you saw as a child of God. It's a person that you helped move one click closer to Jesus and his kingdom. And now they're running to him for eternity. Give me a name. Because there's a one in your life. There's a one. Give me a name. Tell me a one at a time story.